Hi, guys. Welcome to Digital Empaths. And we are your host, Sushant Ajmani.
And Sundar Balakrishnan.
Hey, guys, we are really privileged and honored to have a new guest in our episode today. His name is Bill Roth, a great friend, a mentor. Spent a decent amount of time in my career during the old days in the United States. And it was quite an amazing journey working under him. He's a director of cloud economics at VMware, have over 3 decades of experience in the digital industry and has played multiple roles in the product management as a chief marketing officer in multiple organizations. And presently, he's a part of VMware organization. So Bill.
Sir, it's a pleasure to be here. It's as we've mentioned off camera, you're a mentor to me as well. So it's a privilege to see you again. Great to participate today.
Thanks, Bill. So Bill, before we start our Q&A round, I think I want to tell our listeners a very interesting lesson I learned during our days at GSA Commerce, which eventually became eBay Enterprise. And I think right now we are called Radial there in the United States. And so I remember during the first month of your joining there at GSA Commerce, I think you shared a very interesting lesson with all of us as a part of our product management practice. And you mentioned that when you're building a product, your shareholders, your customers, your internal stakeholders always remember the dates, your release dates, and they often forgive you for the features that you miss in the products. So always stick to your dates because that builds trust, that builds credibility. And that has always stuck with me for more than 12 years, I think, since we stopped working together. Mm-hmm. And I think I really like you to shed some more light on that so that all our listeners can understand that what is the rationale behind that.
Well, I'm glad that something I said back then made some sense. I think what I would say is this. If you think about the product development process and you think about the product management process, or think about a product that you've used. So do you remember when a particular feature came in the product? Probably not. But you're going to remember that if a customer or a company says, I'm going to deliver in May, but they slip, you're going to remember that, and the slip will damage your brand, will damage. So after a while, products get sort of a thin reputation for being not reliable on dates. And it can infect the feeling for the product. So no one remembers, for example, no one remembers when, full XML came into Microsoft Windows, but they do remember the releases that have been late, for example. So it's really, it's kind of a key observation that I've had in leading product groups and in leading product management groups. Stick to your dates because you'll be forgiven if certain features don't make it in. So that's kind of the key observation.
Wonderful. And I know you have spent a lot of time in Microsoft also. And can you go back to the history and think about any one or two interesting lessons you learned during your product journey at Microsoft?
So I think I would say that the product journey, it's really important. And one of the reasons I'm intrigued to be on this podcast is because it talks about empathy, and I think there's a couple ways that this applies. Because I'm very much affected by Peter Drucker in terms of a style of management, and I think he has a really holistic approach. And in this holistic approach, I think you need to understand where your employees are, because in product development, they are, not to be dehumanizing, but they're essentially the machine shop. They are the thing that are going to build your product. So how do you improve their lives? How do you have empathy for their situation so that you can get them working effectively and organized as effectively as possible? I would also say that, the other big learning is that two other things. One, the right kind of leadership, I think, can make people do more than they think they can. I think, and it is the kind of, if you're doing sort of the right kind of leadership. And the second, I think, leadership wise, is as building organizations and building teams, one of the hardest things that a leader does is trying to determine who should be on the team and who shouldn't. And some of the hardest things is always making that decision whether someone may not be right for a team, and making that decision perhaps to help them be successful elsewhere. The single biggest mistake that leaders make is they take too long for that decision, because the wrong person on a team can have an enormous effect. The right person on the team, or removing the wrong person from the team, can also have a positive effect. So that's kind of, I think, kind of most of my experiences are sort of related to people.
Okay, nicely said.
Yeah.
And in terms of, if I look at the last, prior to joining VMware, I know you have played chief marketing officer role with a couple of organizations. And if I look at the past prior to that, I think you spent a lot of time in product management. So I think that's a very interesting career shift. I saw a guy who come from a product management, moved to as a chief marketing officer, and now in the cloud economics in VMware.
Right.
So that's quite a diversified role. So I just want to understand, how does this product management and chief marketing officer, do you see any synergies in these two roles?
I do, and I think it comes from the fact that there are sort of two models. I was at Sun Microsystems for a while, and there was no difference between product marketing and product management. You did everything. There were sort of pure marketers, but Sun had a very strange kind of pure marketing model. So the ability to transition from a product management to a marketing role was actually not that difficult, because being sort of my first experience being at Sun, we had to do both. We were both coming up with PRDs, talking to customers about requirements, and writing web pages and doing press releases. So we gained both sides of the experience. The second model is, I think, more of a Silicon Valley model, which is that product managers work the features, product marketers market the product, work on go-to-market sales enablement and that sort of thing. And so that's actually, to me, a little bit more narrow of a role. And so I think part of it came from the fact that that I was trained under sort of both the models. Now the switch to cloud economics is actually quite understandable in that context. So cloud economics is a great job. This is probably the second best title I've had in my career, because people say, what the heck is cloud economics? Well, in reality, it's product marketing with spreadsheets. So what does a cloud economist do? We talk to a customer and they say, oh, you VMware, you're too expensive. And we say, here's our spreadsheet. No, we're not. So we market with spreadsheets. So when coming out of the VMware Cloud Group, if you ever see something like, you need 71% less staff time when you migrate to the cloud with VMware, that number is quantified and approved by the lawyers through us as well. So we not only help people get through early stage customers and knock down the fact that we're too expensive, but we also do what I call, literally, there's people who market with adjectives and people who market with numbers. I just market with numbers now.
Nice.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Wonderful. I think very nice. And so Bill, it's kind of quite an unfortunate stage that we all are going through this pandemic right now across the world. And I think the US economy has really hit a lot. I think the unemployment is quite high there right now. And there's a lot of distress there. And there was a recent Gartner webinar I was listening, and they were talking about the Q1 forecast for 2020. Yeah. And during that, they mentioned that if you look at the last financial year, the top 3 keywords that they noticed on their website, which the CIOs and the CIO office was searching on the Gartner website, was revolving around cloud, DevOps, and the robotic process automation. But in the last 2-3 months, there's a shift has happened. I think people are searching more around COVID-19, working from home, as well as the cloud is still there. So I think that shows some kind of an indicator that there is a good adoption of cloud is expected in the coming quarters. Some organizations were always skeptical about moving to the cloud. Some of the regulated industries like your BFSI or pharmas or telecoms, who have always been very fuzzy about don't put anything on the cloud, keep everything on premises. And lately, they're also adopting the whole cloud philosophy. So what's your perspective in that? Are you seeing VMware business has been really impacted because of this whole COVID-19 situation?
So one of the things that I really like about VMware, and I'm not doing this because he pays my salary, but our CEO seems to be pretty smart. There's business moves that he's made that in the past I would look at and say, that's kind of interesting. But it ends up always turning out to be a spectacular decision. The first is, so in general, I'm in the cloud business right now. And as you said, there's certain elements of our business which are expanding. And when they expand for our customers, it largely is because they need new capacity. So they need to get out of a data center or, a number of other reasons. But recently, because of COVID, two things have happened. One, there are certain customers who sort of all of a sudden need more capacity to deal with, more business. There's some who need less, but more importantly, we've had an end user computing division that focuses on providing remote solutions for probably the last 8-10 years. And as you can imagine, providing work from home software or software that enables that is in enormous demand, especially cloud deployed. So we've seen a huge increase in our our Horizon 7 line, both Workspace ONE as well as our remote desktop offerings, and the underlying cloud infrastructure. Because if you think about the cloud, and our parent company is Dell. Look, we love Dell, but if you order a server from Dell, it'll take 4 to 6 weeks, and then somebody's got to come in with a screwdriver, install it, get it set up. Whereas on VMware Cloud on AWS, if you want a new server, it's 12 minutes. I want a new server, we provision it, we install the software-defined data center on it, you've got a new server running. So I think people, especially when now they see, oh my God, I've got 1,000 new remote workers that I have to turn on Monday, there's obviously actually it's one of the things that is driving our business. I can't say what's going to happen to the rest of our business. I just know that the two of those aspects are the ones that are kind of really booming.
Sundar?
Yeah, I think as a natural follow-up to that is, when business grows, obviously the risks that get attached to it when it comes to data protection, system protection, all those kinds of things, penetration and all that, those aspects become really important. How have you been typically handling this this kind of a situation, and what does that landscape look like after we turn this corner?
Again, I think the it's better to be lucky than to be smart. And so I think at VMware, we started investing a couple of years ago in InfoSec and a little bit more of that, obviously because we're getting into cloud.
Right.
That turns out to have been a really good investment because it's helped our business quite a lot. We do have a pretty rigorous security system and a security life cycle. We literally have, as part of our development process, a security development life cycle, which is fairly evolved. And all of the employees in my business unit, for example, I have to take mandatory security training every year. But also, I think because we had been focusing on certain government business, they have additional requirements. So we've made sure that our cloud business is on GovCloud. We are looking at we pay attention to a lot of the major security-related government requirements, like common criteria, things like that. But also, we look at some more of the industry standards. Some of them are a bit hard, and you know, Sushant and I have been dogged by this our whole careers, and anyone does in e-commerce. But PCI compliance is something that we're actively working on. So I think it's really, it's something you have to do because of not only the business risk, but the reputational risk, the structural risk. And as you know, VMware has a big partnership with Amazon. You know, effectively, we're running in their data center. And they've been a good partner to work with, and it's something that they focus on as well.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
Sushant, over to you again.
Yeah. So, and in terms of, if you look at, there are a lot of buzz around robotic process automation these days. I think the topic is not new. I think it's been going on for the past 6-7 years. But lately, I think we're seeing a lot of buzz around that. And especially, I've learned one thing during the global financial crisis days when I was in US, that whenever some kind of economic meltdown happens or any kind of a disaster happens, the first thing that comes to people's mind is optimization. That, okay, because now all the investments that you have done over these years, how to smartly optimize it, how to get the maximum ROI from the investment that you have done. Now, if you look at during the old world is flat days, I think there was always a discussion around outsourcing, okay? Ship all the jobs to India, ship all the jobs to Philippines, and ship all the jobs to China, because there's always a cost arbitrage there, okay? And now we are seeing, because of this RPA, because of the cloud infrastructure adoption by most of the companies, do you think the whole traditional outsourcing model is going to be impacted now? In the next decade or so, we're not going to be talking about jobs shipping to India, jobs shipping to Philippines or other, maybe Poland or Portugal, which is the next big hub. So what's your take on that?
I don't know that traditional outsourcing will change a lot. I do think that the cost arbitrage will continue. You know, as economies develop in places like Vietnam, Portugal, Poland, you know, some of the places you mentioned, we'll see those markets develop. What I think you'll do is that you'll start to see a leveling, right? Because, you know, you do not get the price advantages that you used to in India or China anymore. Where VMware has some great development outposts in Bulgaria and Armenia. And so, I mean, and I also look at it as an economist, but also one who's deeply affected by, there's a philosophy out there called personalism, is that I look forward to, I mean, you have these other economies that need development. And this is a great way to do it. There are smart people in Portugal, as you may not know, but I work with an NGO down in Nicaragua and have for the past decade. How can we help people in places like Nicaragua develop? And I believe that there are smart people there. Can we use this? So rather than does outsourcing change, I think the work that the people need to do will change and broaden. But I think outsourcing, the people don't necessarily change. I think where the infrastructure will change. So for example, rather than buying racks and racks of servers from Dell, which of course you all should because they are our parent company, but the fact of the matter remains is that if you don't have a data governance or a data privacy or a data ordinance or sovereignty issue, put it in the cloud. Put it in the cloud. And so rather than working on racks of software that you may have, your outsourcer is going to end up working in the AWS region in Sao Paulo, or something like that. So I think the regional data centers change. What will happen not is a change in outsourcing, but I think the nature of it changes.
Just to follow up on that, I think the more you've spoken in this discussion, the more it becomes clearer that your partner ecosystem, VMware and the rest of the ecosystem around it, is crucial, has always been crucial, And it's probably going to get more important as we turn this tide and go further. How has that management worked before, and what is your thought around how is that ecosystem going to sort of develop going forward from here?
Well, I think what's really interesting is I think the nature and who the partners are is going to change.
Okay.
I think I think that sort of consider with these hyperscalers, you've now got kind of three tiers of hosters, for example. And let's look at those partners.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Amazons and the Googles, the Alibabas. But then you've got sort of a second tier, like Rackspace. And then there's a bunch of third tier folks. I think it's going to be increasingly difficult. There's going to be consolidation at that third tier. There will always be a need to have some unique facility that the hyperscalers don't have. So I'm thinking of, there's a partner Faction, for example, that's got some interesting storage solutions. They do that. They have sort of unique DR to the cloud kind of thing. I think that's that's sort of an interesting sort of second tier. I think the third tier is going to totally consolidate, and you're going to have sort of two tiers. So the partners that you may work with in the managed service provider market, I think, is going to consolidate. I think as part of our system outsourcer, system integrator partner market, what I'm seeing from some of the bigger ones is that they're coming up with their own broader strategic cloud strategy. For example, I happen to work a lot with Deloitte, and they have a great system called Cloud Workbench, of which our cloud economics process, VMware's cloud economic process, is really only one stage of like 7. And it really forces the customer to think strategically about what they want to deliver and where. And that's the kind of IP that I think you're going to start seeing, or you should start seeing, in the successful large outsourcers and integrators. They need to be able to bring a point of view, and they need to be able to bring a broader strategic process rather than just people with screwdrivers, because you're not going to need those anymore because of the cloud to a greater or lesser degree. Make sense?
Yeah, interesting that, the way you put it, it seems like there are multiple blocks in that ecosystem. Each will bring in their super specialities, if you will. That could be AI, machine learning. There could be multiple technologies, but almost hyper connected, well integrated as a strategic solution. That's interesting.
I think it's certainly what I see from some of the larger consultancies is certainly something like that, and they can really provide a lot of value. The downside is these tend to be super long sales engagements, but they do tend to be big at the end. So, quite large. There's a government-sponsored entity here in the U.S. that sort of we took through this process, and that was an enormous size deal. However, it took a year and a half, 2 years. And I think the philosophy brought by the system integrator, system outsourcer, really helped frame the discussion. And so rather than the vendor saying, here's my strategy, and bringing in the outsourcer afterwards, it tends to be driven by the consultancy, the outsourcer, the integrator. And they drag in the vendors in a way that I haven't seen. So it's pretty remarkable.
Nice. So, Bill, you mentioned the word intellectual property, and we also talked a little bit about risk and compliance. So, my question to you is that as a VMware, whenever you enter into any new organization who have recently adopted the cloud, how often the risk and compliance department becomes the biggest bottleneck in the beginning? Do you think there's a lot of criteria that needs to be met? And along with that, now that there's a big buzz about intellectual property, I think everyone is kind of worried about the moment things goes on the cloud, how am I going to protect it? Okay. And I think the fundamental problem is, suppose if you're building a statistical model, what part of the model I'm going to transfer it to my client? Okay. Shall I give my trained model? Shall I give my inference to them? how the data will transfer. Should I transfer via tensor? Should I do that? There's a lot of fundamental questions that comes into mind. And how do you tackle those kind of things?
So what I see, and as part of our model, my team has probably engaged in about 550, 600 deals over the last 2 years. So what I see in this case is, I think the broad majority are usually, and again, this is not just sort of statistical modeling deals, this is all cloud deals. So what I see is generally the standard NDAs that you have with the customer for the bulk of who you talk to are generally sufficient for understanding kind of IP. But then you've got a series of customers who are very sensitive to that. It's largely regulated industries. It's the military intel community. It's countries where there's a history of data privacy, or perhaps their regulatory regime is super complex. Think Germany and Switzerland. And so I think in that case, that's where the solution provider needs to sort of be well versed in the various levels of regulation, as well as the customer's needs. And you have to sort of understand, it goes back to empathy. Essentially, you have to basically understand and have empathy for the customer's situation so that you can understand what's going on and how you can kind of develop the solution that they need. But in general, it's been a struggle, right? I think that there's, I've been at VMware now 7 years, and I've seen some of these regulatory regimes develop. And I know we've recently made some progress on some, but it just feels like it's never fast enough, and it's always a battle we're fighting. But it's never-ending work.
Cool. I looked at the website of VMware. I know there's a whole section around solutions and there's a section around products. And
Yes.
I think, Bill, if you go back to the history, I think we all have come from the services world. And then
Right.
there was a whole buzz about SaaS-based products. I think Salesforce and Adobe's
Sure.
of the world, I think they mastered the art of SaaS. And now we are seeing there's a whole sudden shift is happening. I think even the clients are expecting a more glass box solutions rather than a completely black box kind of a products. So are you seeing a similar trend in your area also, where the clients are coming to you with the specific problems and they're not talking about a product, they're not looking for any black box product, they're looking for a specific solution to that problem? So how often do you need to customize your offering?
So it's interesting because VMware's model, if you look at our financial statements, you'll realize that our consulting and professional services business is relatively small. I think it's anywhere between 10 and 15% of revenue, and this is public data. And if I'm wrong, just consult the 10K and for the right numbers. But so I think what we have is a middle ground of solution, because we're not a big consultancy. We do have a professional services arm, but mainly on architecture, configuration, that sort of thing. So I think what I would say is, when we talk about solutions, it's transitioned from, I need to make sure, so Kaiser, California, one of our big healthcare providers, just using it as an example, and I don't even know if they're a customer, they're just a healthcare organization that I know about. It's gone from, we need to provide hypervisors for their server farm, to, no, what they want is their medical records system, right? So how do we partner with Epic? How do we partner with SAP? How do we partner with Cerner to provide Kaiser the solution for a virtualized medical record system? So instead of rather us force customization, because most of our work probably from your perspective is customized, it's really changed how we partner and go to market. And so when we talk about solutions, it's how do we provide the next step not just as fascinating and wonderful as virtualization software is, because everyone loves it, it still needs to be contextualized. If I'm running a shipping business or a transportation business or a logistics business, I need to put the logistics software on top of that, for example. Make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. Makes sense. Makes sense. And let's shift the gear. And Sundar, heading over to you, my friend.
Sure, sure. I think the other interesting aspect in this, ecosystem that you mentioned, uh, what is the thought process? Who drives that contextualization? Is that a partnership that drives it, or is it led by the integrator or the consulting company? How does it typically work for you?
In reality, it's a mix. So in some cases, the customer knows what they're doing, or a company like Cerner is going to already have the relationship, so they'll lead. In other cases, a Deloitte or an Accenture will come in and have the relationship and be part of a larger strategic process. For smaller hospital systems, in our case, actually, then we will lead. It really is a case by case basis, because the healthcare market is relatively varied. Because you've got sort of small community clinics like the one I'm on the board of in San Jose, where it's a relatively narrow system and can be handled not necessarily with an integrator, right? Just the two IT guys.
Right.
But then you get up to a large healthcare system like Kaiser Northern California, which has millions of patients. That's another story. And that was, and only as a former patient of that organization, I know their medical records journey took a decade. So you've got sort of layers. So it's important to understand the customer, where they are and what they need.
If I may ask you one more. So I know that a lot of our subscribers, our viewers, will be folks who are thinking about this cloud business. If you had to guide them on, say, two fundamentals that they should work on or imbibe as they sort of either pivot or enter into the space, what would those, say, two fundamentals be?
So they're transitioning into the space. I love what people are doing with sort of the online learning, online certification. So I happen to be a fan with our partner, Amazon, their AWS. Go take their online training, get certified, but definitely play around with it. Get your credit card out, do a couple of things. A basic Ubuntu VM can cost you about, if you don't do much with it, it can cost you like $6 a month. Why do I know that? Because that's what I pay. So, right, all this stuff is sort of accessible, and so definitely look at that, and also take a look at both the sort of leading analysts as well as sort of the next generation. For the free kind of research that you can find, or the free research you can download, because from there you can learn about the next generation of technologies. So look at Gartner. I happen to be a big fan of 451. There's other groups out there that do some interesting work, and most of these papers, what marketing or previous marketing folks like me would do is, let's get the really interesting paper and put it behind a firewall so we can do lead capture. Fine, just give them your name, but get the kind of research so that you can learn about the trends in the industry. Make sense?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Cool. And let's shift the gears towards our favorite topic, product management. Okay, that would probably be our last question for today for you. So Bill, how do you feel the whole product as a practice has evolved in the last decade or so? And how important is empathy in the today's landscape? I think lately I realized that we became too transactional. I think our relationship with the customers, our relationship with our vendors, with this ecosystem, I think in this whole capitalistic economy, I think we all have become very transactional. Somehow we lost this empathy touch lately. So what's your take on that? What would be the new product management practice would be in the coming years, and what role the empathy would play there?
So I was talking about this with my good friend Nanda, and she thinks a lot about these kinds of things. And there was an interesting formulation in that conversation, because I think there's actually two angles for empathy. The first is one, really focus on your personas, really focus on the people that your sort of key customers, the key customer personas, and gain empathy for them. What is their life like? What are their struggles? Because the best product management is, and all product management should be, making people's lives better. So how is their life? We know, for example, that the average virtualization user, and this is vSphere, is, at least the American profile, is 34 years old. He likes craft brewing, is married, and has one kid. Okay, so what does that guy need, and what does he want? What are his aspirations? How does he view his career? So how can we help him? So that's kind of one aspect. Is the key thing is to not just treat your personas like robots, but understand more broadly what their desires are so that you can help them achieve those and have empathy for their situation. The second vector for empathy is, how do we take technology and use it to generate empathy? And so there has been a movement, I believe it's called the Wisdom 2.0 movement, where they've been talking about how do we take technology and use it to sort of build a better world, build a kinder world, tell people to, how do we use it to generate empathy? And so rather than just how do I meet my customers' needs, how do I generate the empathy, the good feeling as part of my product development process? Where in my requirements management system, literally, is that box that says, what am I doing to increase empathy? I'll tell you a little bit of a story. So I have a patent. I have my one patent. And my patent, if you go to Google Patents and type in frustration index, that's my patent. When working on some development tools, we developed a patent for quantifying how much the user was frustrated with your product. Okay. And so literally I would tell the product teams, okay, our frustration index for the last release was 1500. Your goal for the next one is I want you to get it to 1100. And it was really a parametric equation that essentially said, okay, how many times on the user interface can we feel them like hunting around and not know where to go? Okay, that's frustration. So I propose, and I'm making this open source so no one can patent it. What is our empathy index? And how do you create an empathy index for your product? And how do you manage that rather than down? How do you manage that empathy generating index up? So I bet you never expected that I would offer a parametric equation for empathy, but there you go. I think
Thank you so much for your time. I know it's quite early in the morning there in California, and it's always a privilege and honor to talk to you. I think almost after a decade we have spoken, and we wish you best of luck. Thanks for taking our time for us, and stay safe, stay connected.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to speaking again.
Sure. And all our readers and subscribers, if you have any questions, any comments, please post it below this video and we'll be more than happy to take it. Thank you. Bye.